Thank you for being with us on such a great day on the SMU campus. I'm Al Nemai, Dean of the Cox School of Business, and my pleasure to welcome you for our event sponsored by the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom. We launched the O'Neill Center in 2008, and we have our second annual report at your place. Please don't look at it now, but take it with you. I commend it to you. It's got a great photo of a little red convertible heading into Texas with California plates. It kind of tells the story about what's going on in our economy. When I secured the major gift from Bill O'Neill, a publisher of Investors Business Daily, to launch the O'Neill Center, then I had to find someone to run the O'Neill Center. If I weren't Dean of the Cox School, I probably would have taken that job myself, because this is the kind of research and work I do when I have time. But I was able to talk my good friend Michael Cox, who had been teaching for us for a number of years. And Michael at the time was chief economist of the Dallas Fed. And I said, Michael, you're counting money, but I can engage you with students and you can change the world by changing young people's minds through the O'Neill Center. And he fell for it. And he joined me and is my colleague and friend now at the Cox School of Business. So please give a warm welcome to Michael Cox, Director of the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom.
And Al knows this, but I'll tell you too, I'm very happy to be here. This is one boat, one ship that's rising. We're now the 12th ranked business school in the nation, and I'm certainly proud to be here amongst a set of wonderful colleagues. I've worked in 5 different universities actually, but never one that has such a great atmosphere. It's really true. I'm here to introduce our guest speaker, but before I do so, let me say a couple of things, what our format's going to be. John's going to get up here and talk for about 25 minutes, after which we've decided to have kind of an open Q&A, not the formal cards. So get your questions in your mind. We're just going to proceed that way, and whenever you say something, say it loud enough that most others can hear it. Otherwise, John will have to repeat it. And that's a little bit of a waste of time. But we do want people to hear it. And then I'm going to get back up here and close with just a few remarks, and you'll be out by 1:30. All right, you have a formal bio of John Stossel in your packet, and I'm not going to read that. Nothing makes me more nervous than trying to summarize somebody's life words in front of them and about 300 other people, but I don't want to just read it. I want to speak from the heart some here, because we brought John here for a purpose. When I think of John Stossel, I think of 2 other people who have been extremely important and influential in the world, and these are Milton Friedman in more modern times, and back from 1801 to 1850, Frédéric Bastiat. Both knew that communication of ideas is as important as the ideas themselves. Imagine an industry which produced goods only to then store them in warehouses, never taking them to the public. That's what the economics profession does today. Even most of my colleagues who believe in and love and practically worship free markets are strangely silent to the general public, talking mainly amongst themselves, as my good friend Bob McTeer used to remind me when I was working for him at the Dallas Fed. But John Stossel does not do this. John takes free market ideas to the people where they belong, and he makes them understandable, indeed compelling. The world needs more John Stossels. And I'm telling you, journalism majors, this is a real opportunity here to be John Stossel, if you can. We need more people in the media who understand, appreciate, and can articulate the power of markets, self-interest, and freedom to transform the world. If I could get teachers to do one thing, it would be to log on to Stossel in the Classroom and learn what's there, use it as a resource, bring it to your students, and that's something all of us can do. It's available there, Stossel in the Classroom, a great resource for teaching free market ideas. So today, let me bring to you and introduce my friend, John Stossel.
So I agree. I wish we had more people in the media who wanted to talk about free markets. I hope if some of you are but journalism students just don't care about this stuff for some reason. They don't go into journalism if they're interested in markets. I'm not sure why that is, but it's clearly been my experience in all the newsrooms I've been in. And I was trained in college that markets are okay, capitalism brings us some stuff, but it's by and large cruel and unfair. The rich rip off the poor. We need government to fix that, to make it more fair. And intuitively, this makes sense to people, and it sure made sense to me. I based my career on it. I was one of the first television consumer reporters. This meant I went around and attacked businesses that we thought were ripping off their customers. And I won 19 Emmys doing that. My colleagues love that kind of attacking business reporting. It took me a long time to see that all these rules that we consumer reporters were cheering for, government regulation, a Department of Consumer Affairs. They actually created one in Oregon based on some of my reporting, and I was so happy. Gee, these politicians were paying attention to young John Stossel. I was important. But I was still on the beat 5 years later when I did some of the same tests that led to the creation of a Department of Consumer Affairs. We'd actually taken a TV set to a bunch of TV repair shops that had a loose tube. Some of them just said, oh, it's just something loose, fixed it. Others said they would have to take it for a couple days and they charged us a couple $100. And I would go back and say, would you ever cheat people like that? And they would say, oh, no, never, we wouldn't do that. And I could say, oh, yeah, well, watch this, and play the tape. And that was great dramatic television, and the politicians responded, and I thought they were just trying to solve consumer problems. Now I realize they were just trying to get their faces on TV and be seen as doing something to advance their careers. But 5 years later, we did the same test and got the same results. The Department of Consumer Affairs was now licensing TV repair shops, but that didn't stop the fraud. Most places were honest. A couple places cheated us again. And they didn't do stings like we had done. You know, they just sat on their duffs like bureaucracies do and collected fees and fines for people who didn't hire the lawyers to register. And the more I looked around, the more I saw that was the norm. Government doesn't fix consumer problems. It burdens everybody with more rules, but the people selling the breast enlargers or the burn fat while you sleep pills kept getting away with it. They're still getting away with it. By contrast, the more I watched competition work, the more I saw that, holy mackerel, that solves problems better than government does. It's not perfect. There will always be some Enrons and Bernie Madoffs in a $14 trillion economy. But what's remarkable is how rare they are. Most people in business are honest. You don't get rich cheating your customers. They figure it out. With the internet, it happens even more quickly now. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy. The way to get rich is to serve your customers well. But nobody taught me that at Princeton. It's just not intuitive to people. The intuition is that, well, I'm kind of greedy. I want more for myself, so you better watch out for those people in business because they're doing a lot of that. And yet, do we step back and say, what did we get from all this capitalism? I mean, our lives are really good. We have these wonderful cars and computers and cell phones. And Michael Cox has written about how they're even getting cheaper as a percent of your income, as well as getting better. And look at supermarkets. I mean, wonderful palaces of capitalism that we just accept. Now, when I argue this with progressives, they say, you know, okay, the market works well for trivial stuff like cars, computers, supermarkets, but when it's important or complicated, you have to have government plan it for us. For example, medicine. That's why government has to take over healthcare, because if you have cancer, if you have a stomach pain, you don't know if it's cancer or something more serious. You need experts to make that decision for you. Likewise, K through 12 education. parents don't know what the kids ought to learn, so you can't trust the parents to pick the kids' school. We need professional educators to do that. Because there are the consumers aren't educated enough. And again, intuitively, there's sort of a sense to this, kind of makes sense. But it's nonsense, because you don't need to have an educated consumer for the market to work its magic. It works its magic anyway. As an example, consider cars. Do you understand why one is better than another, safer than another, runs better than, I sure don't, I'm no automotive engineer, but consider the worst that you can buy here in Texas and compare it to the best the experts in government could produce. Well, that was the Trabant. Do you remember it? It was the East German car. And it was such a bad car that you had to put the oil and gas in separately and shake the car to mix them together. And yet it was made by the East German engineers. These guys were rocket scientists. And yet this and the Yugo was the best the planned economies could produce. And they disappeared when the Berlin Wall went down, when the Soviet Union died. So why? Why could their best not compete with our mediocre stuff? Because not everybody has to be an expert for the market to do its magic. You just need a few car buffs, a few people to read the car magazines. And through word of mouth and an open society, the good and bad news spread. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy. Now, I'm not arguing that the market will take care of everything. We need some government. We need government to keep us safe. We need rule of law. I mean, the worst places in the world to live are the places that don't have enough government or reliable government. The African country where you're afraid to build a factory because your neighbor may just steal what you make, or a dictator may take your whole factory, so you don't build it and they stay horribly poor. So we need government to keep us safe and to have some pollution rules, run the courts, do what the founders had in mind, limited government. I mean, this is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution together. It's this thin. This is what built the country. Now we get 80,000 new pages added to the Federal Register every year of new spider webs of rules to slow us down and for us to hire lawyers so we understand them. I don't think that's made our lives better, but how big should government be? What percent of the economy should government be? Just somebody throw out, what's a realistic number? You students, what should it be? Somebody. What do you say? 10%. When you ask most Americans, they say 5%, 10%, some say 20%. And here's a graph of the growth of the country. For most of the history of the Republic, government was less than 5% of GDP. Here it is adjusted for population growth. It's only since Lyndon Johnson and the promises of the Great Society that the line starts shooting straight up. And of course, under Obama, it's shot up even farther. We're now at 40% of GDP from government. I would argue it's time to stick a fork in it and say it's done. But of course, the regulators never feel they're done. They feel they're not doing their job if they're not regulating. The lawmakers feel, I measure my career by how many new laws I got passed. It's a terrible measure. I wish they measured them by how many laws they got repealed, but we're not there yet. And they have an intuition on their side. It's our intuition that when there's a problem, there ought to be a law. And they have, why does this keep backing up here in my? It's East German or some union engineer somewhere. The government claims that we're safer in the workplace now because of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And it's true that since it was passed, workplace fatalities have dropped steadily since 1971. And the head of OSHA under President Clinton was fond of showing this chart and making speeches. And then we, though, went back before this and noticed, went back before this and noticed the slope of the line before OSHA was just the same. And too seldom do we think about this, but things get better on their own in a free society. As we get richer, we care more about safety. We get smarter about how to make people safer. Even the employers, which the progressives say would kill their workers, they don't want to kill their workers if only because they would have to spend more money to train them. They have profit-making self-interest in keeping their workers safe. But they say we need these laws. And I would argue that government is like someone who gets in front of a parade and claims to be leading the parade. They are not. And then now we have at least some people in Congress who are saying government is too monstrously big and we have to cut it, and they scream. I mean, they're talking a 2% cut that Republicans are trying to get. When ABC was bought by Cap City, they cut 5%. Then Walt Disney cut another 5%. Jack Welch said the only way to run a company is to let 10% of your workers go every year. That's the creative destruction that makes an economy work. The government never cuts anything. It's all essential. Boy, this is just working backwards here, all on itself. But just as an example of how not essential it is, they even subsidize rich people who build in foolish places like on the edge of an ocean, people like me. That's young me in the upper left. I built a beach house in Long Island, and I asked my father for help on the mortgage, and he said, "What, are you nuts? It's on the edge of an ocean. You shouldn't build a house there." And I could say, "Well, Dad, I see your logic, but there's something called federal flood insurance that guarantees my investment. I can't lose." The architect explained it to me. And it was true. For a couple $100, I could insure that whole house. And this happened because after floods, the government said, "Oh, we're spending so much tax money bailing people out. We can't have that. We got to get these people to buy insurance." And private insurance exists, but the government said, "Oh, these greedy insurance companies, they're pricing it too high. That's why people don't buy it. So we'll create federal flood insurance and we'll know how to price it properly." And of course they price it too low, and you're now on the hook for more than $1 trillion of oceanfront property. And sure enough, my first floor did eventually wash out, and I thank you. I never invited you to my beach house, but you helped me pay for it, so thanks for that. And eventually the whole house went, and you paid for that too. It's disgusting the way they spend. I'd say they spend like drunken sailors, but drunken sailors spend their own money, so that's unfair to drunken sailors. You know, you're spending it on DART. There's beautiful empty trains here in Dallas. There's some personal reference here to DART. Okay. The other thing that the media gets wrong, and we see this in the coverage of what happened in Japan now, in all the hysteria over the possible radiation exposure, when thousands of people have been killed just by the earthquake and the tsunami, and the risk from the radiation is so much less. I mean, heck, my father's father was one of the first dentists to use dental x-rays, and my father, when he was a teenager, would go to my grandfather's office on the weekends and hold the plate. And he lived to age 92, so radiation affects all of us differently. The risk from Japan is nothing to Americans, but the media is all excited about that. We don't put risk in proper perspective. And so I was doing these stories as a consumer reporter and was finally starting to realize that, and so I compiled a list of what kills people in America. And I had that up on my wall, so I was ready when the producer came in with the next scare story, which came from the trial bar, as many of these stories do. All of them do. And that was, Bic lighters are exploding in people's pockets, setting them on fire. They've killed 4 Americans over the past 4 years. And you're laughing here, but this really did happen, and people were horribly burned. And they had pictures, because the lawyers make it easy for the reporters. They have found the person who is most telegenic, and you don't even have to make a phone call. They've put you in touch with them. They've used the power of force. We give only to government and lawyers in America, subpoena power, and they've got every piece of paper some company produced. And they hand it to me, and in there you can find something you can spin as dirt, and then I can be the big hero investigative reporter beating up on business. But as I said, I was wise to their scam by then, and I could say to this producer, well, look, that's great, let's do Bic lighters, but look at my death list here on the wall, and we really should, before we do that, we should do plastic bags, because they kill not 4 but 40 Americans every 4 years. Or bathtubs, or 5-gallon buckets. They kill 200 Americans every 4 years. Kids fall into them and drown, toddlers. It's a big country. A lot of nasty things happen to people. If we get hysterical about every small risk, people won't be able to pay attention to the big ones. And he called me callous, and they got somebody else to do the story. But then the free market worked. Competition, I got a job offer to work someplace else, and ABC, to keep me, agreed to give me 3 specials a year, and I insisted the first be one we called "We're Scaring You to Death." They wouldn't let me call it that, and they changed it to "Are We Scaring You to Death?" But we are scaring people to death. And in researching this, I learned that my death list was too crude. The way the risk specialists compare risks are by how many days each risk takes off an average life. And here are some of the things we cover. Plane crashes, big news, but less than 1 day off an average life. We're very scared about terrorism, but even if September 11th happened every 3 years, and it's been 9, less than 2 days off an average life. Compare that to ordinary house fires. Much more of a threat to all of us, and yet you don't worry about a house fire. You do worry about terrorism. A $10 smoke detector is a wonderful thing. And then all these risks just shrink tremendously if you add driving to the list. Now, this should make us rethink our plane crash coverage, because when the planes crash, we go crazy. We're here live at the scene. We don't know anything, but we'll keep telling you what we don't know live for hours. And when we do that, we make people scared about flying. And they used to try to get me to do stories on the 10 most dangerous airports or the most dangerous airlines. And that's a sexy story, but I refuse, because I think that's statistical murder. Because when we do those scores, after the plane crashes, when we do those stories, fewer people fly. More people drive to grandma's house, and that kills people. Should also make you wonder about the people driving farther to get to the organic food store. And watch how these bars have to shrink to make room for cigarette smoking. I mean, the smoker worrying about getting brain cancer from his cell phone is just nuts. And still more interesting, this last bar. It says poverty, it could say low income. If you are below the poverty line in America, in the lowest quintile of income from other countries, your life is 7 to 10 years shorter. Some of it's because poor people smoke and drink more, maybe more reckless. But most of it is because poor people can't afford some of the good stuff that keeps us alive. They drive older cars with older tires. They don't eat as many fresh fruits and vegetables. Wealthier is healthier. You have the earthquakes in Haiti, Japan, Chile. There's there's vastly more death in Haiti from a smaller earthquake than Chile because of wealth. Not because of government enforced building codes, but because of when you're rich, you build your house of bricks rather than straw. And Japan will recover well from the earthquake because they have wealth. In Bangladesh, there are floods that kill thousands of people. In America, you have floods that are just as bad, and with the single exception of Katrina, nobody dies. Because we have wealth. We have cars so we can drive away, radios to hear about the flood, dikes to divert the water. Since wealth prolongs life, this means that if government, as it does, and the media obsess about the risks at the top of the chart, and that's where most of the global warming, minor chemical leakage, the BP oil spill, stuff like that, trivial in the big picture risks, then money can't flow to its best use. Capital isn't used in the best way. Then we're a little poorer. If there are stupid rules, as there are, and the W in Victory Park took longer to open because of them, or the North Park Mall, or the new engineering building here, then that makes Texas a little poorer. The headline should be, new OSHA rule to save 4, kill 12. But you won't see that because reporters don't think that way. So I finally, in my career, come around to realizing these things. I write a book about it called Give Me a Break, and this changes my career because suddenly I'm not winning Emmys anymore. My colleagues are not as happy with me, and there's this anger I feel around New York where I work. And someone one point came up to me on the street and said, "Are you John Stossel?" "Yes." "I hope you die soon." And so I'm trying to understand what's this anger about. And at first I thought that they were angry because they viewed me as a conservative. And where I live, that's equal to being a child molester. It's the worst thing you can be. But I'm a libertarian. I don't think the government should police the bedroom. I think the drug laws do more harm than good. I think homosexuality is okay. I don't see why they should be so angry calling me a conservative when I share a lot of liberal beliefs. And I came to realize they're angry because I'm a consumer reporter who's now defending business and criticizing their sacred government. And I'm trying to understand, why do they hate business so much? I mean, you don't experience this here in Dallas or at SMU the way we do in the west side of Manhattan where all the New York Times reporters live. But they really do. And if they're not angry, then it's because they hate business because of the disparity of wealth, that the New York Times reporter is mad that his slightly stupider college roommate is now making more money than he is in business. There are the big wealth disparities that upset some people. But then I thought about the even bigger disparity in old Europe, where the kings and queens made 1 million times more than the average person, had 1 million times more money. And yet they weren't hated, they were revered. But the people hated the bourgeoisie. They gave them that nasty name. They hated the very people who sold them the things they needed to make their lives better. There's something innate about being suspicious of business. So what's that about? And I've come to think that it's intuition, because people think of business as a zero-sum game. If somebody's making a lot of profit, I'm losing. They're making it off me. And I can see why you lawyers think that way, or some of you politicians, because your world does work that way. One of you wins, somebody else has to lose. But business doesn't work that way, because business is voluntary. Every transaction happens only because both parties at least think they win, or it doesn't happen. It's win-win in every situation. Even when you buy a cup of coffee, you give her the buck, she gives you the coffee. You say, "Thank you, thank you." Each of you says it. Why the double thank you moment? Because you wanted the buck more than you wanted the coffee. You wanted the coffee more than you wanted the buck. She wanted the buck more than she wanted the coffee. The transaction doesn't happen unless you both win, because it's voluntary. Only 2 ways to do things in life: voluntary or force. Government is force. Litigation is force. The rest of life is voluntary. That's better. And this means that business doesn't make us poorer when Bill Gates makes billions of dollars. It's not like this is pie and he takes a piece out and we have less. He bakes, you entrepreneurs, bake thousands of new pies. You make us all richer because business is voluntary. But that's not intuitive. We have to explain it to people. It's voluntary and it extends our lives by making us richer. Entrepreneurs do far more good for Americans than Ralph Nader and the army of busybodies in Washington who want to run your life. Capitalism is a good thing. Let's stop taking it for granted. I mean, think about it, all the ways you do. That supermarket, did you know it has 30,000 products on average? They're open 7 days a week. They're food is dirt cheap. They rarely poison you. People think it's government that stops food inspection, that stops the poisonings. It's not. It's brand names. It's companies wanting to have a good reputation for their name that makes them much more careful than government about food poisoning. Think about you could take a piece of plastic and stick it in a wall and cash will come out. You can go overseas and hand it to someone who doesn't even speak English and he'll rent you a car for a week. And when you get home, Visa or MasterCard will have the accounting correct to the penny. We just accept it. Don't think about it. But the government can't even count the votes accurately. And now government's going to run your business and take over health care? Give me a break. I thank you for fighting for the liberty and the economic freedom that made America possible. Thank you very much. Thank you. And why don't you say who you are so your neighbors can get to know you?
There's a book written recently called It's Different This Time, having to do with the history of economic, I'll call it major dislocation. The recession that we just went through, is it truly different, and if so, how?
Is this recession different? And if so, how? I mean, I don't know enough to answer that question. People are always saying, this is different, and now we have so much government, maybe it'll make it harder to recover because you're afraid to hire if you can't fire somebody or you don't even know what the rules are. But I would think that this one is not different, that we will recover to some extent. I don't even know, I should shut up. I don't know enough to answer your question. Yes, sir.
John, my name is Steve Zipkoff. What is your solution to oversized government?
What's my solution to oversized government? Well, it's tough because it's the natural progress of things for government to grow. Thomas Jefferson said that, for government to grow and liberty to yield, and that's what's been happening. Republicans said they were going to shrink government, but Bush sure didn't, and even Reagan didn't. So the trend has been in the other direction. All I can do is I give some of my speech money to this Stossel in the Classroom charity to buy these free market specials from ABC. Fox now gives them to us to repackage them into a DVD for teachers. So millions of teachers now can educate their kids. So at least let them know there is another side of the story out there. So when they hear it later, they won't be so bewildered by it. You know, what else can we do? I wish business would speak up and fight in the marketplace of ideas more. I mean, Texas is oil country. I'm appalled that when there's all this shrieking about, say, $4 a gallon gasoline, why no one in the petroleum business gets up and says, what are you whining about? We have to dig this stuff out of the ground, and now we have to go 7 miles deep sometimes. We have drills that bend. And then we have to pump it in pipelines that go for hundreds of miles and put it in ships that cost millions of dollars, ship it across oceans, send it to refineries where they refine it into 3 types of gasoline. They put it in trucks that cost $100,000 each to go to a gas station where they have to spend all this money to make sure you don't blow yourself up. And the gas still costs less per ounce than the bottled water you buy in that gas station. You should appreciate this. And you should want us to make more profits so that we can do all the environmental stuff you want us to do and drill for more oil. What do you think we do with our profit? Just buy fur coats and fancy cars? Well, we do spend it on that, actually, but that's just less than 1% of the money. Most of it goes to reinvesting in the... Look, an honest argument can win people over, but business, by and large, cringes when the activists attack. Yes? Yes, ma'am. From a journalism student, what advice I would have for journalists? Well, here, remember these. You can have these declarations and constitutions. My advice you won't want to hear is just don't go to journalism school. Learn some economics and just pay attention and go do it yourself. All the cameras are smaller now. The whole business is changing by the minute. And if you can make a video that somebody likes, you can put it on YouTube and say, here's my work, and maybe somebody will hire you. But most of the people I know in the business did not go to journalism school, and I certainly learned through fear of failing, and I think that's the better way. Yes, sir.
My name is Austin from journalism. You had said about government needs to be less in our country, but isn't that what led to the recession in 2008, the lax rule of regulations on the banks that put a lot of the poor people where middle class America into the state we're in today?
So I said we should have less government, but isn't a lack of regulation, less government, what led to the current problems? No, I would say, though that's another reason not to go to journalism school, because they teach you that stuff. But that's not fair, because they teach people that, and that's what people believe all over America. So this requires a somewhat longer answer, but there was no deregulation under Bush, for one thing. Though he's called the deregulator, they churned out more regulations than any administration before them. Glass-Steagall was changed under Clinton before that. You know, it's conceivable that some regulation might have prevented some of the heavy leveraging that caused some of the problem, but it never works. There's this movie that won the Oscar, Inside Job, that implies that if there were this fairy dust of regulation, you would stop the bubble from growing and popping. But that assumes the regulators know where the problem is. That assumes they're smarter than all those smart people who were pouring their own money into the bubble and the belief that housing could only go up. And the regulators aren't smarter than they. And if they did regulate some specific area of it that might have been a problem, that group would form a lobbying group that would hold off that regulation, and some other area would be the problem. The best regulator is the free market, which lets you fail. So if you take big risks, you lose your money. And the bailouts in this case interfered with that, because they said they had to bail out for this terrible crisis. But why? Because the stock market crashed, and Hank Paulson panicked, and all his friends were close to him calling up, oh my God, you got to do something. And the people closest to the panic always feel the government has to do something in every area. I've seen this all my career. Remember the killer bees that were going to come up from Mexico and sting you all to death? Remember Y2K, all the computers were going to crash in the year 2000, the planes were going to crash, bird flu, swine flu, all of it. The people closest are the most panicked and the quickest to demand government action. In this case, a few of these men had $1 trillion of your money at their disposal, and they spent it to bail out the banks. But why was it such a crisis? Well, the market went down. But anybody here remember what was the Dow Jones average when I was a young reporter in 1982? Well, it's a smart group here. People say 3,000, 5,000, 8,000. Somebody here knew it was as low as 776. Inflation was 15%. Unemployment was like 12%. We don't even remember that. Why was this a crisis? A bubble burst. It went from 14,000 to 8,000. It's popped back up. But government feels it has to act. So my rude answer to your question is, A, it wasn't a crisis. It was a bubble caused as much by government as by lack of regulation, because Freddie and Fannie, by buying all these loans, encouraged people not to care about the mortgage risks they were taking. And more government is certainly not the answer to that. Sorry for such a long answer. Yes, sir.
Wait, Richard, I'd like to know your opinion regarding the potential implications of the fairness doctrine.
Of implications of what? The fairness doctrine. Fairness doctrine, that sounds good. It's kind of like social justice. No, I'm for social injustice, if you know. I'm for the unfairness doctrine. Fairness doctrine says, it was a government rule, that if a radio or TV station puts on a point of view, like mine, then the opposing point of view has to be given time. Which sounds warm and snuggly, but in practice, what it means is that you couldn't have Rush Limbaugh or MSNBC, and that strangles the free flow of information. And there's some talk about the left reviving it to try to kill off Fox News, Rush Limbaugh. But Sean Hannity is convinced it's a real threat. I'm not so sure it is. That politically it has traction. I don't think so. Yes,
How
Mike?
important do you think public education has been to the state that America's in?
How important do I think public education has been to the state that America's in? I mean, public education is a mess, and by that I think you're talking about K through 12, because at the college level, we already have a voucher system. We had it with the GI Bill after World War II, and the money's attached to the student. You can take it to any schools. Colleges compete, and SMU, like colleges in America, are the best in the world. People from all over the world want to come here. K through 12, we spend a ton, and we're in the bottom half of the world. And it's a government monopoly. And of course, this is public education in America. And of course it's lousy. Government monopolies are always lousy. Has that made it worse politically? I don't know. Where I live, the smartest kids go to Brown and Wesleyan, where they learn socialism. So it seems like the more educated they are, the more they don't get these principles. So I don't know what to say about that. Yes, sir.
32 years ago, we had the incident in 3 Mile Island, and the reporting was absolutely awful. Here we are in 2011, and once again, we have a nuclear incident in Japan, and again, the reporting, both in the electronic media and in the print media, have not been, how should I say, accurate, responsible. 3 Mile Island set back nuclear energy in this country by 30 years, and I suspect this latest incident will do the same. And I blame a lot of it on the media and the way the media report these types of incidents. I mean, is there any solution?
This to understand the nuclear industry, to speak up and get, I mean, the reporter, I mean, I agree with you, their coverage is awful and just moronic, and reporters tend to be math illiterate and science illiterate, and unless you scientists aggressively say, no, you're getting it wrong, I mean, they don't want to get it wrong, they're just clueless, and over again explain it to them, you're not going to make headway. And you're right, 3 Mile Island, Jane Fonda, meltdown, it's going to go all the China syndrome. Set nuclear power back for 30 years. Now, from what analysts at the Cato Institute tell me, it's not so practical, nuclear power. Even if there weren't idiots trying to stop it for foolish environmental reasons, its costs are so high that nobody wants to invest in it without a government guarantee. And Obama was offering $8 billion as a government guarantee. Government shouldn't be subsidizing the nuclear business either. So I don't know that it's terrible for America that we don't have the nuclear power we might have, because now we're finding new ways to get cheap natural gas, and that takes the pressure off. A couple more? Yes, sir.
Your opinion, do you think Obamacare will be repealed?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Do you think Obamacare will be repealed?
Do I think Obamacare will be repealed? I'm no political analyst. I don't know. But for the first time in my career, there at least is a political movement where a bunch of congressmen seem serious about shrinking the state, and that's encouraging. I mean, the Tea Party I'm not so confident about, because they say it's too big, government's too big, don't touch Social Security, don't care. And what people say when specific programs finally fall under the knife, I'm worried about. Yes, sir, again. Sure, ask another. This group, the journalism students should get up and ask questions.
And I actually saw a special that you did a couple of days, or a couple years ago, when you talked about Americans being too stupid to vote. And as an African American male, that's kind of offensive, only because the only requirements in our country to vote is being over the age of 18 and being a U.S. citizen. So no matter if you're dumb or perceived dumb, or the smartest person in the world, that's the very foundation of our country, is the right to vote. So how do you, being on Fox News now, how do you defend something like that when you're a reporter?
All right, well, it's a good question because I object to several pieces of it. Just to be really devil's advocate. First, I object to the phrase African American. I think you're a black student, and I'm not a German American. And why on TV do we now use a 7-syllable word when a 1-syllable word will do? Because Jesse Jackson years ago decided we should be called African Americans. I mean, who named him the word God? So I object to the common use of the phrase African American. And in terms of the point about not voting, I didn't say in my piece that there should be a litmus test for voting or that anybody should have to pass a test. I just said that after watching all these get out the vote events done by leftist groups at rock concerts and then interviewing the students at rock concerts who thought Roe versus Wade was something about international trade, and I forget how clueless they were about so much. I held up pictures of Vice President Biden. Nobody knew who he was. I don't want those people to vote. And I didn't want me to vote when I was your age because I didn't know anything. And I think it's fine to say, wait till you're older or till you know more stuff to vote. I was saying we shouldn't celebrate these get the kids out to vote movements. I was not saying there should be any barrier to an adult voting. And on that note, thank you very much for hearing me out today.
Thank you, John. Well, we have, no, it's more than that, more than a hat. We have several things here for you. Thank you, John, for coming today and for speaking to our group. We really appreciate it. And once again, Stossel in the Classroom is an excellent source of more material just like this. Or you might watch his program, Stupid in America. It's also very good. Or Greed, or many of the other ones. Is America Number One? I was on that program with John, all which have done a lot of good. So before you leave, I want to remind you that we have our new report, Looking for the New World, which is our second annual report of the O'Neill Center. If you want a copy of last year's, called The Ascension of DFW, there are some of those on the way out. Please pick that up. And we also want to remind you that on October 14th of this year, we have our third annual O'Neill Conference right here in this center. That's on a Friday, and we hope you can join us then. And finally, in closing, let me thank you again for our sponsors for this event today, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.